We're very happy indeed to welcome you to this year's award, and particularly to welcome Professor Edith Hall, winner of the International Hellenic Prize on its 28th consecutive year. In this introductory note, it would be remiss of me not to mention that Edith Hall has been shortlisted no fewer than 7 times for this award, first in 2008 and last in 2022. It is true, of course, that this prize is never awarded to the same person for a second time. The list of winners on the last page of your brochure readily confirms this. But no other author, historian, scientist has ever been shortlisted more than twice in this prize's 30-year history. Edith's books are a joy to read, a joy and an education for the general reader, a thought-provoking commentary on modern history, and particularly on contemporary events. The history of ancient Athens, pre-classical, classical, and especially post-classical, including the saques of Mytilene, Miletus, and Milos, as well as the disastrous expeditions to Sicily, can serve as an indispensable manual to the intimate relationship between history and politics. As we all know, ladies and gentlemen, human nature does not change. Edith Hall will speak to you in a few minutes, and I must make haste. Let me bring to your attention then that, as you may have noticed, this is the first year that the London Hellenic Prize has changed its name to the International Hellenic Prize, as it has intended to do for the past few years, and as its committee has recommended for a long time. Why so? We receive anywhere between 150 and 200 submissions every year from authors and publishers in the UK, the USA, Canada, Europe, Australia, Japan, even China and Hong Kong. Our audience is the English-speaking world throughout the planet, and we are happy that our winners and their books on Hellenic history and culture enjoy universal appeal and universal sales for many years after their first publication. We read this as an indicator of the validity and scope of Hellenism worldwide, with a courteous bow to the international medium of the English language. Yes, Your Excellency. If an accolade should be addressed to this 30-year consistent progress, it must be addressed to our adjudicating committee, with eminent Hellenists, Robin Lane Fox and Paul Cartledge, as its 2 major senior members, and Dr. Nick Lowe, its current chairman. The full committee is listed on page 3 of your brochure, and I suggest we kindly give the committee a show of thanks, since most of them have been unable to travel and join us this evening. The International Hellenic Prize welcomes its cooperation and partnership with College Year in Athens, now completing its first year and looking forward to many years to come. The established goals of both institutions have always been to promote Hellenic history, culture, literature, and art to a worldwide audience, and to foster cross-cultural understanding and creative achievement. These are the goals of international Hellenism, a cultural presence of universal appeal for the past 5,000 years. Whether the civilized world of Minoan Crete exchanges language, ethics, and trade with Egypt or the Levant, whether the Cyclades and later Argos, Athens, and Sparta gave their way to the Macedonians, and they in turn to the Hellenism of Alexandria, its scholars, inventors, and authors. I certainly will not go on to the Byzantines, to the early Renaissance of Padua and Florence, to the French Enlightenment, to the Athenian democratic principles that shaped modern European nations. It is indeed a very long story, but a very real one, and a very Hellenic story. It is, you might call, the universal soft power that Greece is entitled to, and which its Ministry of Culture has employed sparingly and quite unimaginatively to date. Let me offer here, ladies and gentlemen, two prominent examples. Almost every archaeologist and many historians in Turkey feel utterly frustrated by the fact that they are digging and researching unearthed Hellenic art, artifacts, and language everywhere, every time, and yet being unable to proclaim its Hellenism within their Ottoman traditional framework and to freely join world science in their fields. We must find a way to speak truth to their indigenous power, to stop just calling them friends, for friends and neighbors they are and will always remain, and find a way to work together in history and culture toward a mutual goal. Whether we like it or not, we share time and space. We share the aesthetics and the language of beauty and history. And here's a second example. The Parthenon marbles are a long, complicated, and very political story. They have been standing over our city for 2,500 years. When Melina came to London in 1983, she let out a cry of overwhelming emotion, which cry vastly overshadowed her debate at the time with the director of the British Museum and later at the Oxford Union. Melina did not quarrel. She did not negotiate. She spoke from the heart and expressed the nation's heartache. That is all you need, dear Ministry of Culture. The true sentiment of undeniable historical facts. Stop measuring the consequences. Stop shielding yourselves with sophisticated arguments. Perhaps Stephen Fry is your best spokesman. Cry out, and the reverberations echo worldwide. No one anywhere in the world doubts that the Parthenon marbles belong to the Acropolis. We are, ladies and gentlemen, the International Hellenic Prize. We're part and parcel of Hellenic soft power. I thank you for your attention, and I'm pleased to invite to the podium my dear friend from our school days at Athens College, ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Chairman of College here in Athens, Mr. Alexis Philactopoulos. Thank you.
Kalispera σας. Good evening, Your Excellency, Ambassador Lodge, Professor Edith Hall, Professors Stallings and Karamanu. It's a profound pleasure for me to welcome you this evening in my capacity as Michael said, Executive Chairman of the Board of Trustees of College here in Athens. We are happy to pay tribute to Edith Hall and her book, Facing Down the Furies, Suicide, the Ancient Greeks and Me, which is this year's selection of the esteemed International Hellenic Prize, formerly the London Hellenic Prize, an institution with a 30-year history, so admirably curated all these years by my friend, Michael Moschos. College here in Athens has joined forces with the International Hellenic Prize, and we are delighted to be its sponsor this year and in future, I hope, because it very much reflects the mission of College here in Athens to expose today's students to Hellenism as a living tradition of inquiry, debate, and cultural exchange that continues to call us together. Our collaboration underlines also our conviction that books will remain strong. They will remain strong in this world of cataclysmic technological change that will remain unparalleled means to inform, to educate, to entertain, to preserve culture, to inspire thought. Next year, CYA celebrates 65 years as an academic nonprofit organization, a premier study abroad program for mostly US university students in the heart of Athens. We are an incubator of philhellenes and a bridge between Greece and North America. CYA continues to foster deep, enduring ties between the two cultures, shaping generations of students whose lives are enriched and transformed by their time in Greece. Classical studies was the initial discipline when CYA was formed. That's why CYA was formed, actually. And they still remain central in its curriculum, but a broad range of disciplines, including social sciences, STEM, economics, business, finance, round out the program. Field study trips across Greece and the European Union and the Mediterranean, excavations in Despotikou near Antiparos, in Gourimadi, in Charistos, expose our students to timeless classical lessons and broader horizons as globally minded citizens for today's world. Today's students are navigating a world that is highly technological, but often lacking in human connection. They are more globally linked, perhaps, today, yet fractured by misunderstanding very often. Rich in data, but in need of deeper meaning and context. CYA and the Hellenic Prize advance the enduring power of shared intellectual purpose, reminding us that in a world increasingly shaped by speed, scale, and automation, the quiet, deliberate cultivation of humanistic learning remains essential to preserving depth, wisdom, and our shared humanity. May this evening renew our commitment to cultural exchange, the duties of intellectual inquiry and thoughtful discourse, as we devote ourselves to passing the wisdom, or that wisdom perhaps, on to the next generation. Thank you, and very welcome.
Your Excellency, sponsors and friends, honored colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, our online audience watching this from around the world, including my fellow judges back in the UK, wishing they were here, as I did last year when I was trying to do this virtually. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all, celebrating tonight the extraordinary achievement, not just of Edith Hall, but actually of the enormous range of authors and titles published in what for us certainly seemed to be one of the best years ever, possibly the best ever, for books on all aspects of Hellenic culture and tradition. We, as Michael Moskos was saying, we get an enormous number of submissions, usually in the high hundreds. We read 123 books last year, and it was extraordinarily difficult to come up, even with a short list. There were half a dozen items that we had formally to denote as deserving of special mention, and I am going to give them special mention because they're amazing books and they're not on this screen at all. But two wonderful books on the Seven Wonders, Alain Badiou's book on the Colossus of Rhodes, possibly the most page-turning academic title I've ever read. Bettany Hughes's book on all seven wonders, one of a number of fascinating dualisms in the list last year. Melissa Funke's book on Phryne, not someone you would, Phryne the courtesan, not someone you would expect to be able to write an entire book about, but there were two books about Phryne last year, absolutely wonderful. Anthony Kaldelis's History of Byzantium, really magisterial achievement by a major scholar, accessible to an enormous range of readership and one of the absolute new classics that would be on every reading list. When John Maher's 700-page book, Polis, landed on my desk, I thought we had our winner already. There's always a book like that that you think nothing can possibly beat. In the end, it didn't quite even make the shortlist. Martin Winkler's book on cinema and the classical imagination, no, classics and the cinematic imagination, both about the representation of the ancient world on screen, but also about the cinematic in ancient literature, drawing on a lifetime study and the distillation, really, of his thinking about this subject for decades. And none of those made the shortlist. It was a really difficult shortlist to whittle down, but here were our five. Christopher Childer's Penguin book of Greek and Latin lyric verse, the kind of book you would see on a bookshop table and think, oh, Penguin have put out an interesting anthology of translations. It's not that at all. It's an original, extremely audacious, single-authored anthology of translation. There is Latin in the title, but it is overwhelmingly Greek in its content. And these are really ambitious formal translations, taking some of the most formally difficult poetry ever written in Greek, and doing things with highly formal English verse. He rhymes. If you want to read a 21st century rhyming translation of Pindar, a thing that you would go into this book thinking is not even achievable, Childers is your man. He takes a very inclusive, let us say, the definition of lyric. He includes things like Callimachus's hymns. A lot of the Latin material is stuff that would not really be counted as lyric at all. But there's a wonderful essay by Glenn Most at the back talking about the way the idea of lyric has transformed over the millennia, and why actually a book of this kind is a fair representation of what lyric means to readers of ancient poetry in English. Everyone should have a copy of it. It is a tremendous achievement. Alex Christophi's Kypria is a book that I don't expect is going to be translated into Turkish anytime soon. This is the book you would want to put in the backpack of anyone heading off to Ayia Napa. It's a history, a journalistic rather than a scholarly, but an extremely well-informed history of Cyprus, ostensibly from antiquity till the present day, but its real subject is the 20th century, on which it is really, it pulls no punches, let's say. It speaks to the eternal theme of how the British managed to leave catastrophe behind everywhere they go. And it's a tremendously readable, tremendously insightful exposure of an enormous succession of ghastly colonial mistakes, and an absolutely compulsive read if you want to try and piece together now what happened in the last century. But it is far more than that. It is also a book about Christophe's own Cypriot identity. And there's a wonderful bit at the end where he looks back on his own diasporic identity as a British Cypriot who nevertheless carries his island history with him. I hope it gets very, very widely read. It's a tremendous volume. Sasha Dugdale's The Strongbox, which we were very pleased to see won the other major book prize in Hellenic subjects, the Runciman Award, is a poem cycle. It's a really extraordinary poem cycle. It's notionally about Helen of Troy, although it actually begins, and this is kind of the point, with what may or may not be a contemporary abduction narrative of a trafficked bride, or possibly she's trafficking herself. And it jumps back and forth between past and present, between myth and real experience, through an astonishing range of poetic forms, often in quite a challenging way. It's a very it's often a very difficult text. I mean, some bits of it are extremely accessible. Some bits are really chewily, brilliantly hard. But it is a magnificent collection and has been rightly rewarded. There's a book by Edith Hall that other people are going to be talking about later, but a book that meant an enormous amount to the judges, and which really was one we took to our hearts, was a book that I think is already quite well known in Greece. The Greek translation came out in 2022 and received the Essay Prize from the Academy of Athens. Tony Mulhaux's Courage and Compassion, I think the least good of the international titles of this book. In French, it's The Kindness of Others. In Greek, it's The Banality of Goodness, which, of course, is Mulhaux's own inversion of Hannah Arendt's famous phrase. This is the memoir by a historian of his experiences as a child survivor of the Shoah in growing up in a Jewish family in Thessaloniki, and the hair-raising series of narrow escapes that led to his ultimate survival, but running through it a thread of small acts of kindness, which is often not a part of Holocaust survival narratives, even by the occupying Germans, and all wrapped in a meditation on what a historian researching his own memories does to your sense of what was really happening in your own experience, and the person you were, the person you've become, and the way that history is remembered and reconstructed on a personal as well as on a public level. Absolutely amazing book, and one of those books that does kind of tip your worldview in a better direction with its emphasis on the life-saving power of small, inexplicable acts of humanity in the middle of horror. And of course, humanity and horror is the subject of our prize winners book. And to introduce it, we have an absolutely wonderful double act. In a moment, you'll be hearing from Professor Ioana Karamanou, Professor of Classics at Aristotle University, Thessaloniki, a very old friend of many here, and one of Earth's finest humans. But even before her, we have Professor Alicia Stallings, Professor of Poetry in Oxford, of course, but as well as a poet, she is a scholar and an essayist and a former shortlistee for this prize. And I dare say that she will be in the frame, as it were, for this year's prize with her amazing work on the Parthenon marbles. But Alicia is going to speak first, and then Ioana, and the two of them are going to discuss different aspects of Edith's achievement.
It's a pleasure and honor to be here tonight in this capacity. Edith Hall, Professor Edith Hall, is one of those people that you say needs no introduction, but actually needs two introducers. But as my introduction is my brief here, I shall briefly introduce. Edith Hall was born in Birmingham, won a major open scholarship to Wadham College, Oxford, and did a DPhil at Oxford. That DPhil degree became her seminal book, Inventing the Barbarians, one of my favorite books. She's also a founder with Oliver Taplin of the Interdisciplinary Archive of Performances of Greek and Roman Drama, and currently professes at Durham. When we think of classics and classicists, we tend also perhaps to be classist. A classicist in the mind's eye tends to be white and male and to come from a long line of academics. We picture him in a library in an ivory tower, aloof and apart from the Sturm und Drang of public life. This has, of course, never been entirely accurate, even among Oxford classicists. As a recent book by Daisy Dunn reminds us, famous classicists have been conscientious objectors or founding members of political bodies from Ireland or Australia, and have fought in wars and helped rebuild nations. Edith Hall is, in this line, a very active and indeed activist classicist. Edith Hall has worked to break down class barriers in classics, partly by bringing attention to them and showing that working men and women have been profoundly engaged in classics and classical reception. She has taught me that classical scholarship is not about retreating from the world, but engaging with it, and that as antiquity is always speaking to the present moment, made ever accessible and fresh through new translations, so the scholar and the poet translator is also perforce an activist, that scholarship can be both personal and passionate. Whether about migration and the other in Inventing the Barbarians, a title which seems also to wink at Cavafy's Waiting for the Barbarians. If they didn't exist, we'd have to invent them, because those people, after all, are a kind of solution, or about family dynamics or the besieged natural world. I think of Greece as often being on the front line of various world crises at once, be it economic, movement of populations, or environmental. These things interest me as a poet, and they interest my husband as a journalist. Classics speaks to me about each of these things. I was delighted to find, for instance, recently, as I was writing a long poem about trees in Homer, that Edith Hall was on the same page and working on a scholarly work on the same topic, The Epic of the Earth. Simon Weil famously called the Iliad the poem of force. Hall reminds us the violence of war is made possible then as now by the violation and exploitation of nature. Behind the feasts and funeral pyres, the polished wooden ships and rough-hewn palisades, lies epic deforestation, Weapons from bronze and iron require not only unimaginable amounts of charcoal for smelting and forging, but mining of the earth, backbreaking labor invisible in the poem. Hall shows us how an awareness of the Iliad's cosmic and ecological dimensions can help us read the poem more urgently and face our relationships with the earth and each other with more wisdom. In Facing Down the Furies, the book we are celebrating tonight, Edith Hall explores the shame, silence, suffering, and anger that come down through generations in a family with a history or curse of suicide. She reminds us that, as with so much else about the human condition, the Greeks have been there before us. Suicide and its concatenation of consequences, often begetting other suicides, being a frequent subject of tragedy. Hall weaves her own clear-eyed confrontation with depression and suicidal ideation with her astute and sensitive readings of the Greek plays to offer us what is ultimately a humane and affirming vision of life. As she quotes from Sophocles, "Sing the song of sorrow, but let good prevail," words we need more than ever in these darkly interesting times.
Your Excellency, dear members of the Committee of the International Hellenic Prize, dear members of the Academy of Athens, dear colleagues from Greece and the United Kingdom, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and an honor to be able to say a few words about a classicist whose work I profoundly admire. For the members of the audience who are classicists, no introduction is really needed for Professor Edith Hall. For those who are not classicists, it may suffice to say that Edith Hall is a star of modern classical scholarship. Key areas of her scholarship include Greek drama and classical reception, being the co-founder of the Archive of Performances of Greek and Roman Drama in Oxford University, gender and scholarship, ecological issues in Greek myth, epic and tragedy, ancient ethics in the modern world, classics and social class. She has published more than 30 books that include monographs, 2 excellent commentaries, the first on Aeschylus' Persians and the most recent one on Agamemnon, and edited volumes, and has published widely in peer-reviewed academic journals, collective volumes, and newspapers, as well as collaborating with professional theaters as a consultant. The laureate is a world-leading expert in Greek tragedy and its reception, among other fields. Her groundbreaking DPhil Oxford thesis, Inventing the Barbarian, Greek Self-Definition Through Tragedy, delves into the concept of ethnicity and the other in tragedy, arguing that theatre was centered to how Athenians defined their own identity, by contrasting themselves with non-Greeks. Her monograph, entitled Greek Tragedy, Suffering Under the Sun, is a comprehensive introduction to all extant tragedies, stressing the democratic character of the tragic genre that aims at provoking intense emotional and philosophical debates. In her theatrical cast of Athens, Interactions Between Ancient Greek Drama and Society, she shifts the focus from what the plays mean to the material reality of theater, delving into the ways in which the physical act of performing and the types of characters portrayed interacted with Athenian society, testing the limits of Athenian identity. Her research on classical reception includes Greek tragedy and the British theatre from 1660 to 1914, co-authored with Professor Fiona Mackintosh. This work explores how Greek tragedy was used in Britain as a progressive force, mirroring political upheavals and social shifts, and often serving as a tool for radical thinkers and the aesthetic avant-garde. In a similar vein, her monograph on Toni Harrison's radical classicism focuses on how the prominent poet and playwright Toni Harrison, who passed away a few months ago, used ancient Greek and Roman material to speak for the oppressed and the working class, thus proposing a politically charged engagement with antiquity that rejects the idea of classics as a legacy for the elite. This concept similarly pervades her monograph entitled A People's History of Classics, which explores the deep engagement of the British working class with classical literature. Her interest in the intrinsic association of classical reception with cultural history also emerges from her Return of Ulysses, a cultural history of Homer's Odyssey, and her Adventures with Iphigenia and Tauris, that traces the cultural impact of this play from the ancient world through to opera, Goethe's verse drama, post-colonial theater, and modern film. Since 2022, the honorand is a Fellow of the British Academy, as well as being the first woman to be awarded the Erasmus Medal of the Accademia Europea. She's now running a major ERC-funded research program on Aristotle's writing styles. Edith's commitment to making classics more inclusive is unfailing. Her energy and determination to showcase the instrumentality of ancient ideas in the modern world also emerges from her reintroducing Aristotle's wisdom as a guide for contemporary living, and from her recent activity of teaching ancient ethics and tragedy in English prisons. Her scholarship is defined by a commitment to uncovering the voices of marginalized groups and demonstrating the enduring relevance of ancient Greek thought in the modern world. In this vein, Facing Down the Furies, that well deserves this award, is a book about what classics may teach us today. Unlike earlier works in the field of suicide in ancient tragedy, such as Groaning Tears by Alice Garrison, Edith Hall creates a narrative that is both personal and universal, in that her family saga is woven in between the macrocosm of Greek tragedy. The Furies, inherently associated with the archaic concept of the inheritable curse, impersonate the transgenerational trauma that is at the core of the book. The author employs her personal memoir in conjunction with insights from Greek tragedy to explore the repercussions of a person's suicide upon those left behind and its transgenerational impact. The book's main argument lies in the wisdom and solace that Greek tragedy may offer to those who are profoundly bereaved. It is this concept that is set out in the book's first chapter, whereas the second chapter investigates the philosophical arguments on this matter, from Plato and Aristotle to David Hume and Albert Camus. The author sides with Aristotle when it comes to the awareness of the grief inflicted on family members. Nonetheless, Greek tragedy, which is the focus of the next chapters that form the book's main part, is liable to offer more satisfactory answers than philosophy by exposing the roles that are left unfulfilled when one takes one's own life, as well as lessening the isolation of those left behind through the tragic representation of pathos that is accompanied by empathetic acknowledgement. The fate of the author's ancestors is parallel to situations from Greek tragedy, and their repercussions on their closest kin are illuminated by tragic paradigms. the heroic suicide performed by a man of honor, such as Ajax, and the female suicides enacted in a state of despair, such as that of Evadne in Euripides' Suppliant Women, or Phaedra in Hippolytus, or Deianira in Sophocles' Trachiniae, showcase the causes and the ghastly consequences of these acts on family and society, whilst their immediate aftermath gives everyone incentives for contemplation. Yet, the most articulate tragic voice is that of Theseus, consoling his friend Heracles, who has killed his wife and children in a state of madness in Euripides' Heracles. In the wake of utter guilt and shame, the hero finds no other way out than resorting to suicide. Theseus manages to talk him round by acknowledging the scale of his suffering, reminding him of how much he is needed by his kin and the wider community. By means of quiet listening and non-judgmentalism, Theseus' radical humanism, as the author eloquently puts it, persuades Heracles to persevere in living, choosing endurance over self-destruction. Edith Hall has offered us a forceful, compelling autobiographical account that is imbued with the gravitas and profundity of Greek tragedy, showcasing its therapeutic value. The deep, timeless resource of tragic exemplar that she so articulately brings alive for us in her narrative gives scope for contemplation about the ways in which one may come to terms with personal and familial trauma. This book, which illustrates the healing qualities of Greek tragedy, yielding deep insights into timeless human experiences and making the past speak to contemporary challenges, is a vigorous and articulate case study proving why classics still matter. Thank you very much.
Bit round. Your Excellency, sponsors, friends here and online. Kyries και Kyrii, αποτελεί μεγάλη τιμή και προνόμιο για μένα η απονομή αυτού του σημαντικού βραβείου. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω τους κριτές και τους χορηγούς, ιδιαίτερος τον κύριο Μιχαήλ Μόσχο, για την αναγνώριση της ερευνάς μου. Είμαι παθιασμένη φιλελληνίδα, μήπως παθολογική, και αγωνίζομαι για την επιστροφή των γλυπτών του Παρθενώνα στην πατρίδα τους. Έχω εμπνευστεί από το λογοτεχνία και τη φιλοσοφία των προγόνων σας όλη μου τη ζωή. Ευχαριστώ πολύ όλες και όλους σας που είστε εδώ σήμερα. Ας γιορτάσουμε την εξαιρετική συμβολή της αρχαίας Ελλάδας στην ιστορία της ανθρωπότητας. My hair's in it. Okay. Where's my clicker? So, I do not want to keep us long from the wine. And I'm going not to read any kind of paper, but just to chat for perhaps 20 minutes about how just in the 21st century, the ancient Greeks have helped me to think about very 21st century problems. So this is the book that has won the prize. I am absolutely astonished that of all the books that have been shortlisted, this is the one that got the prize. I don't fully understand it. I wrote this book in about 4 weeks in a rush of self-therapeutic frenzy. The history of it it's all in the book, but my mother died in 2016. She is the little baby there, born in 1925 with her mother, Edith. And my mother was an only child. In fact, her mother lost a baby, a baby boy, which I think precipitated the lifelong depression that Edith Masterton suffered from. But my mother died in 2016, that's in the right century, of natural causes, having never said a single word to any of us about her family. We knew nothing about anything. There were no photographs. There was no information. She did occasionally say to me, "You're so like my mother," which wasn't helpful. She had named me after her. I was 3.5 when she died, and it is my absolute founding primal memory is the day my mother got the news. I was alone with her, and I describe this in the book. But then a few years later, my sister, who's inherited the family house in Scotland where my mother lived, gave me a large box full of papers, photographs, certificates, newspaper cuttings, all sorts of things. It was a total Pandora's box for me, in which I gradually began to piece together what had happened to my mother, the impact of the deaths in her family on her. And as I say at the end of the book, it's actually a journey for me from really almost despising my mother because she cried every single day. Every single day. It was very difficult to be angry with her, and children need to be angry with their parents because she would cry. She was depressive and strangely closed off. She did all her duties as a mother brilliantly. You know, she was dutiful and conscientious, but strangely closed off. I often used to dream about her being in another room in the house, but I couldn't. She's in the house. She's a present mother, but I can't speak to her. Anyway, so I open the box, and what's the very first thing that comes out? Very blurry old photograph. This is the Student Representative Committee of Edinburgh University in 1912, early 1912. As you can see, they are all men. My grandmother, Edith, is the only woman. She's a suffragette. She's getting an astoundingly good degree in English literature and Latin. I have actually inherited her copy of the Poetics of Aristotle. Spine chilling for me because it's a text I know very well, where she has underlined it all. Her father killed herself just before her finals, and she followed suit 50 years later. She never recovered from her father's death. Her father was an Ajax. He died, I think, out of wounded pride and status. He drowned himself. And the really awful thing I discovered was that I think his mother also killed herself. But this was back 3 generations. It's difficult because Scottish death certificates of that era do not say. So my grandmother, who jumped out of a window of a high hotel, it just says exposure, right? My grandfather drowned himself, and he definitely drowned himself, so it just says death by drowning. And we can't even find a death certificate for my mother's great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. There was also a first cousin of my mother who killed himself, and I think very upsettingly for her, that was actually not from her mother's line, but from her father's, which meant that it was coming about her from both directions. I think I became a classicist. One of the many reasons is that my identification with Greek tragedy was so profound as a teenager. And I think I didn't realize it, but I think this idea of the intergenerational suffering being handed on was one of the major attractions to me. I'm a firm believer that what people write and so on, and what they're attracted to, has a biographical element. I used to think it was just about impaling barbarians and things, but doing this book has made me realize that it's much, much more. So these are the plays that I write most about in the book. Ajax is not saved from suicide, even though he has actually told everybody he's going to kill himself. I laugh, but it's the classic male suicide where he tricks people. He says, no, I'm all right now, go away, and they leave him alone. One of the great lessons of Greek tragedy, you do not leave people in a suicidal state, which is usually very temporary, 2-3 days. You do not leave them alone. Poor Deianira in The Women of Trachis, very moving from the point of view of the grief of her old servant woman and her son. Oedipus, terrible grief at the suicide of his wife and mother. Antigone, of course, we have not only the self-killing of Antigone and the suicide of Haemon, but we learn at the end of the play that Haemon's brother had died only a couple of days before the mother in that play. Brilliant Sophoclean stagecraft. I mean, unbelievable plotting that you think to the end, and you've got all these, and then out comes the old queen, and we find out that the man who's been on stage all the way through, Creon, had just lost a son, and he's never told us. It's extraordinary. And Euripides, there are many more than this, but Theseus's grief in Hippolytus, the grief of Evadne's old father in Suppliant Women, and the talking down of Heracles by two people not related to him by blood. I find this particularly moving. This is a non-biological adoptive father and a friend, not a blood relation, and that means a lot to me. This is a particularly profound engraving, I think, of Sophocles' Ajax. Over his corpse are his half-brother Teucer, his woman Tecmessa, and his little son. And the entire second half of the play revolves around their grief, which there is no play like it. What I realized in the course of doing the research on the history of the representation of suicide in culture was that it's only very recently that anybody's been at all interested in those bereaved by suicide. My book is not actually for suicidal people. I'm not suggesting they don't read it, but it's actually for those, and I find that about half of all the people I talk to have suffered from someone they loved or knew or who taught them ending their own lives. I feel it's like, life is very difficult. Life is unpleasant, even when you're in the most fortunate circumstances, as most of us are, and at peace and living long lives. We're all basically in a waiting room for our number to be called out. So I do feel that image very strongly. If somebody jumps before their number's called out, I think it demoralizes everybody. I think it's incredibly difficult for the community, and actually that's what Aristotle saw. That was his objection, is that it damages the community. So I'm going to get a bit more cheery now. There are two other things 21st century. I decided when I was at Royal Holloway, a colleague of Nick Lowe and Christos Kremidas, who is also here, two old Royal Holloway allies are here. It was in 2007, it was the 200th centenary of the abolition of the Slave Trade Act in Britain, not of slavery. That did not come until the 1830s, and even then did not apply to India. But the slave trade was stopped, and this is the first significant piece of international legislation since the French Revolution, and that had been rescinded to begin to chip away. It was also the anniversary of the first real inroads made into India by the East India Company in the 18th century, and of what used to be called the Mutiny, and is now called the Independence Uprising of 1857. And I decided, with colleagues of mine, including Feroza Vizunia, who was an Indian citizen, the professor of Greek at UCL, and Patrice Rankin, who is an African-American, now professor of Greek, I'm thrilled to say, at Chicago, to have a real go at the British Empire and classics, and actually try and find out exactly what the history of this toxic association between British imperialism and classics. And the story is partly very bleak. It is about many civil servants being trained in the classics to go out and govern the colonies and the Raj in India. But there's some very inspiring other sides to it as well, with campaigners against repressive colonial imperial behavior using classics in much more progressive ways. The other thing I really wanted to do to help to counter this elitist and old dead white males image of classics, famously called oddwems by Bernard Knox, a very great American classicist, the oldest dead white European males, the oddwems. So with a former PhD student, now a colleague at Durham, Dr. Rosie Wiles, we decided we were going to excavate all the great women classical scholars. So at least there might be some oldest dead white European men and women up on the walls. And we found very, very many. One that I'm passionately fond of is the lady with the feathers dressed up as Minerva, Elizabeth Carter, magnificent translator of Epicurus in the 18th century. But each of us did a different famous one. Jacqueline de Romilly, I gather, is very famous in Greece, and you have a square named after her. But there are numerous others. So we can hang up some lovely smiling ladies on the walls beside the oddwems. And I did a similar thing with Dr. Henry Stead, now a senior lecturer at St. Andrews, on social class. And I'm actually prouder of that book, I think, than of anything else I've done. It took me 25 years to gather the data in it. Overwhelming evidence that people who did not have time, leisure, or money to learn Latin and Greek made the ancient Greeks their own in extraordinarily positive ways, including trade union banners. My children got me into green politics about 9 years ago. The day I decided to write Epic of the Earth was the day that President Trump, in his first incarnation as US president, pulled out of the Paris Accord. I was so outraged that I didn't know what to do. And like Alicia, had always been struck by the tree chopping down scenes in the Iliad. She has written the most stunning sonnet cycle, which she let me quote in the book. And it was quite uncanny to discover that we'd been thinking along exactly the same lines. Her great gift is poetry and translation. I am not a creative type. I have an analytical brain. But I decided I can't tie myself to railings. I don't want to throw yogurt at famous works of art. I really don't. But I could say, look, we can start looking at important works of culture, just as we've done it from a feminist point of view, or we've done it from the point of view of the working classes, or whatever. We can do green. And so I have done a green reading of the Iliad. And I try to end on a cheerful note because the trees of Mount Ida, there's a unique pine tree, unique to the Ida Mountains around Hisarlik. It's appropriately called Abies nordmanniana subspecies Equi troiani, Trojan horse, because the botanists, it's probably Linnaeus or someone, quite reasonably assumed that it was trees of Mount Ida that had been chopped down to make the Trojan horse. But this tree is incredibly endangered. It's incredibly sad, but quite recently, the last few trees of Mount Ida on its summits were saved. A mining company, a Dutch-Canadian mining company called Alamos Gold, bought basically the rights to these mountains, and started cutting down all the trees. They cut down thousands in weeks, poisoned all the rivers with their chemicals. But a Turkish green organization found out by using drones, went up and set up camp on the mountains, had musicians and folk singers, and they took their children. They made a little city on the mountains and stopped it. They actually stopped it by peaceful action. This was only a few years ago. And the Turkish government revoked the mining rights from Alib, just said, right, you can't have them, but gave them no financial compensation. It's now pending in international court. But the fact is that these local people said no. They said no. And I think this is a glorious story, and I end the book with it to try and encourage people not to feel as helpless in the face of international monopoly capitalism and lazy and cowardly governments to actually do something. And finally, I heard last night, it's delightful, I'm here to get a prize. I had been invited to an event in Manchester yesterday, run by the largest provider of education in British prisons. Novus is a charity. I'd been invited but could not go because I was coming here, and was absolutely thrilled to hear from my colleague who I do it with, Arlene Holmes-Henderson, that it's on the right. She's second from the right in the blue top, Arlene. And those are some heads of prison education at some of the prisons where Aristotle's ethics are now on the curriculum. And we won the prize. We won the prize for the best new student-facing course in British prisons for Aristotle. Here are the teachers that I trained. I am there, as is Arlene. These are all heads of education of 12 different British prisons. And in a week in January, you can see Aristotle's face there. We trained them up. We get no money for this prize, unfortunately. We're just told we're very good girls. So, been doing this for 2 years, and as an indication, the textbook is Aristotle's Way, because it's reasonably accessible. Most of them can read it, and it's now informing. And this is the course. It's basically 6 sessions. One is on his rhetoric, how to be persuasive. Most of these very unfortunate people have never even been taught how to answer a telephone, let alone write a CV or conduct yourself in an interview, and they've told us this, de-escalate a fight on the wing in prison. There are ways of handling it through using rhetorical techniques like, not, no, I disagree, but I see your point. I'd quite like to take this in a slightly different direction. There are little things you can do. The main thing is why being a good person will make you happier. So that's Nicomachean Ethics 101. And we have 2 or 3 sessions on that. We have very much finding a purpose and fulfilling your potential. Now, I have not yet done a lifers prison, people in prison for life. I'm nervous about it for obvious reasons. Most of the prisons I've been teaching in are for young offenders who really do have a chance at getting out and making a life. The Ministry of Justice heard about us as well, because in the British electoral, what the Labour Party promised for prisons was that people were going to be taught skills so they could sell their skill, building, hairdressing, after they left, and also find a purpose. But they had no teaching course whatsoever about finding a purpose. So Aristotle's teleology, an idea that each of us has a unique dynamis, is just perfect for this. We have making decisions, Aristotle on deliberation, he has a 10-point plan. We have choosing and keeping friends, and when to deselect friends, what friends go in the bin. And they can be members of your family if they are trying to damage you or have tried to damage you. Aristotle recognizes no distinction when he's analyzing friendly love relationships. He recognizes no real distinction between family. You assess this person according to how much respect and kindness they treat you with. I relate to this very strongly. Yes, we perform a tragedy. In the men's prisons, we do Philoctetes, and in the women's prisons, we do Antigone. We can't have any murders, you know. I'm not going to go in and do the Agamemnon, much as I'd like to, especially given that there are only 6,000 women prisoners in Britain. There are 95,000 men. Of the women who were in for murder, almost everyone has killed her man. Almost everyone. There are hardly any who've killed anybody else. This is Clytemnestra 101, and they often have similar reasons. So they perform a tragedy. They love it. They really do. And because of the chorus, everybody can be in it. And I always give them a little mini Oscar for the best performer, and that's taken by vote by the whole prison. But then we do also really talk about the emotional issues, who's right, who's wrong, who's gone too far. And then, constructive recreation. I'm a great believer, the ancient Greek, as I think today, for leisure is scholi, which is the same word as school. It's a place that you can educate yourself, right? It's a time when you can actually get to educate yourself. Most of us over-define, and I've been talking to people here about this, over-define who we are by how we earn money. My husband, whenever he's asked what he does, he's been a journalist, he always says, I visit medieval castles. That's what he does, as far as he's concerned. His life is visiting medieval castles, right? He does other things to make money. And people are always like confused. But why do we only define by how we make money? It's ludicrous, right? Now, I'm pathological workaholic, so I don't do anything except work. So it's a bit more difficult. But I'm trying to say, when people say, what do you do? To say, I cook well and I'm a good swimmer. I try, but it doesn't get very far. So that's the course. I'm incredibly proud that we've got this award. This will help us, I hope, to source more money, because we do it entirely for free, entirely, and in my spare time. But we do need funds for very cheap hotels near the prisons. I'm going next to a young offenders in Swansea, and if anybody feels like helping, advocating classics education, teach classics and philosophy in prisons, you can find it on Just Giving. I would say that I have put in half of my prize. Thank you for giving it to me. The first thing I did with it, I got it a couple of weeks ago, the first thing I did was put half of it in this fund. And hope that we can raise, we can do a prison for £1,000. It's peanuts in terms of big donors. The other, I will say, I feel very selfish, but I have never visited Epirus, and I'm spending the other half on holiday of a lifetime this summer with my daughters in Epirus. I have never been to the Dodoni. I've been everywhere else in Greece, everywhere. Also around a lot of places in Black Sea and Turkey and Sicily that were Greek and aren't. I have never been to the Dodoni, I have never been to Ioannina, and I have never been to the Nekion. So I'm going to be going down the Oracle of the Dead this summer thanks to this prize when I'm having a break from teaching in prisons. So thank you very much.
Edith, thank you ever so much. I think none of us has ever heard such a personal, solidly based, such an exceptional lecture on Greek classics with an aspiring, a lively social conscience. I mean, this is Greece. We have prisons in Greece as well, don't we? And here is advocating classics education in British prisons, being given a first prize by the Ministry of Justice of the United Kingdom, and Edith creating it, doing the work for it, and raising money for it, and talking to these prisoners about Greek classics in this lively, constructive, hopeful way. Let's give her another hand. I'm very proud we have listened to this lecture this evening, and I'm very proud that this year's prize, or last year's prize, was given to Edith for her wonderful book. It's a personal approach to classics, but Edith has done more than 30 books on classics, and the personal approach has come as a number, what, 32, 33, 34? So it does make a huge difference. Edith Hall, I want to thank you very much for your work on Greek history, Greek classics, Greek literature. I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. And please, ladies and gentlemen, read Edith Hall's books. They will give you a great pleasure and a great joy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Edith. I'd like to ask His Excellency, the Ambassador of the UK, to award the International Hellenic Prize.
I've already spent it.
Michael, am I allowed 60 seconds first, if I may? Edith, ladies and gentlemen, let me just for my part, and I'm not going to get into odd whims or wake of destruction after the British Empire or other still sadly topical issues, but I would like to say again here, it's a great pleasure to be back with you this year. An acknowledgement and a profound congratulation to all those, Michael Moskos, all the team, Dr. Nick Lowe, the committee, Alexis Philaktopoulos now and CYA, who drive this prize and have done so now for more than 30 years. It is, I think, a wonderful illustration of the importance of that rich seam of cultural understanding, study of Hellenism, academic excellence and scholarship that rightly needs to be promoted and celebrated. And I'm particularly pleased that this year, as we've just witnessed so wonderfully, that the winner, Professor Edith Hall, as Michael said at the very beginning, nominated no fewer than 7 times, has, in those last 20, 25 minutes, given such a passionate and enthusiastic illustration of the humanity of her approach to the classics and the very evident passion and enthusiasm with which she approaches the issue. So it is a great pleasure to be with you this evening. It's been a great pleasure to hear from you, Edith, and it is a distinct honor for me to be able to present Professor Edith Hall with the International Hellenic Prize. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this evening. I haven't mentioned the 10 ways to shape the modern world as the ancient Greeks thought of it. It's a great read. You will enjoy it. So please make sure you read it. Thank you very much. There's a reception for downstairs, and congratulations to Edith Hall.